So may I introduce Pete Cashmore, Hans Vestberg, and Fabien Cousteau.
Let's go. Take the stairs. Take the elevator. You want to play that one? Or this one? We good? Alrighty. Okay.
Well,
Hello. Again. Well, since you've all heard from us in the past here today, I think the introductions we can skip. Let's get right down to the questions. Hans, when you're one of the leaders, you're the CEO of a leading telecommunications company in the world. How does expanding technology reach out to, or how can it reach out to more people? You know, you have an educational project that reaches to some of the poorest communities. How does that engage those communities?
it's a very good question, and let me start a little bit, just go back to the technology evolution we see. As I said this morning when we talked, I mean, it took 100 years to get 1 billion fixed lines in the world. Now, it took roughly 20 years and it's 5 billion mobile subscriptions. And the only thing we know for sure, that will continue. By 2017, in our projections, it's going to be roughly 9 billion mobile subscriptions. That means that people will have more than one subscription, of course. But what is more important, I think that's so important for us here, how we can spread the word, is that it's going to be 5 billion mobile broadband users. That means that we're going to triplicate the amount of people on this earth having access to internet the next 5 years. So if you have that in your hands and thinking about the transformation and how transformative technology will be in the future, and all of you sitting here, you're, as a consumer, already transformed. We are doing a lot of consumer research on how you use your phone. For 3 years ago, all of you had a feature phone. Maybe you don't even remember it, but you had. Then you spend 95% of the time on the phone to making a phone call, calling a friend, calling a business associate or something like that. And you spend 5% of sending an SMS. If you today have a smartphone, which many of you have in this room, you spend 75% of the time to actually do something else than calling your friend or your business associate. You check your mail, you're taking down content, you're checking the weather, you're blogging, you're twittering. A dramatic change in 3 years that we have seen by using smartphones. The next 5 years, the majority of everybody coming in to the internet, coming part of the inclusion, they will use a mobile phone. Because the majority of the Earth population will actually get access to the internet through it. And we're going to see transformation in any industry. And as I'm here, we're discussing how we can address many of those challenges. And I think that the speed of change that we see today is actually the slowest pace we're going to see in all the future. It will just increase in speed the technology evolution. And I think that's where I'm starting, sort of just kicking out the foundation, what you can do with technology, and then we can talk about some examples.
Before we get to that, Pete, I have a question for you. As far as you're the founder and CEO of Mashable, of course. You're also kind of an icon of the connected generation. I am maybe a little old for that demographic. I hope not. I seem to feel like I should be part of that demographic. But more importantly than that, when we hear all this bad news, for example, at 2 o'clock this morning, I heard some bad news that they've taken the oceans off the agenda as far as negotiations, which to me personally is quite frustrating. How can someone, any individual out there who has those frustrations and wants to be able to do something, use your platform or connect and actually do something?
So there's a few things. I think, obviously increasingly we have access to government through social media. But I would actually almost go the traditional route. You know how powerful, and this is the most bizarre thing to say at a social media panel, but I'm going to say it. Letter writing, petitioning, the traditional stuff remains incredibly powerful because we've kind of lost the art of writing the letter. So it kind of does make that impact. But yeah, you can absolutely tweet members of government now. You can absolutely form Facebook groups and start petitioning that way. There's many modern ways to do it. But it's really, I think, about coalescing on these sites. You know, an individual can do so much, but if you can form a group, you know, obviously around this conference we formed a hashtag and people are connecting around that. And we got it, actually it was the #1 trending hashtag in Brazil, which is great, which means that people who aren't here are going to see that and start digging in and listening. So it amplifies what we're doing because everyone else is suddenly seeing it. So I think it's about, you know, forming connections, forming groups that'll last over time.
I just got a little note from one of our Twitter followers, someone who's stalking us from the wild beyond, the virtual world, at George Matthew, and he's asking, what do you think can change the future that we want? I'm going to throw it out to the panel. Anyone can grab it.
It's basically a very wide question. One thing that I would like to mention, as you were speaking about social networks, I mean, we are doing a lot of research on consumers, and it's clear that one of the deepest concerns they have is sustainable development. That is coming up when you ask them what is important. And even more frightening is that 50% doesn't know what to do with it. 50%, how can I support sustainable development? And then you come back to the conversation we have here and in this room. Because if we can create groups that actually are addressing ideas, sharing ideas, improving CO2 emission by having a debate across all the borders around the world, that's what we can do in this room. That's the power you have of a Mashable or a Rio+Social. And I think that for me is very important. No one has the single solution, nor a company, nor a country. It's going to be the combination of all those brains and all those stakeholders. That's the only way I see the future moving forward. And that's why we think it's important to be here, to actually say what we think we can contribute to, but we cannot solve everything.
You know, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second. Population is really your basis for your market, in a sense. I mean, you sell products, you sell services, so on and so forth. Yet we're also facing a huge population increase problem. Granted, it's finally starting to slow down a bit, and the estimates from yesteryear aren't quite as dire, or they're not quite as dire as they would have been. But this being your market, and also the crux of many of the problems that we're facing in our environment, what can we do to address things like lack of education in STEM-based educational programs and such, and use the tools that you all have developed in the most poignant of ways to further that?
Yeah, I would love to take that, but I'm not sure. But when it comes to education, we have spent a lot of time to creating forums for discuss the future of education. And of course, ICT will play a vital role there. I mean, just to getting the internet connection, as we saw this morning with the village in Pará, Sorocaba, that for the first time in their life had a classroom with 5 computers, and they were connected into this room and actually could see what is going on there. Suddenly, their whole world is opening up by bringing that solution to them. And I don't think that it should be where you're born or where you are from in the way you should going to get the education. Because education in the future is going to be digital, and anybody should be able to get that type of education. And in the latest research we have seen, it would be actually better to do the lessons, the school lessons from home, and you actually do the homework at school. Because that will actually bring much more efficiency for the student to learn, to get the training individually at school, and you get the lecture sitting at home digitally. I mean, just imagine 10, 15 years from now, education can be totally different by using the technology, using the internet, and getting it to anyone that wants to study at Harvard should be able to do it.
Yeah. Now, another one. This is from John Rice. What is the best way to translate online communities into tangible action-oriented groups offline?
Sure, so there's a few ways you can do this. I think you know, one of the most successful platforms that Mashable uses, we have an event every year. It's called Social Media Day. It's on June 30th. We use a platform called Meetup Everywhere. And, you know, first time we did this, so there's communities all around the world, and what happens, it's very distributed, right? Because the future isn't centralized, it's all about distributed communities. So anyone in any city in the world can say, hey, I'm going to have a social media day meetup, I want to meet everyone else in social media in my town. And, they go to the site, Social Media Day, and they can self-organize into groups. And anyone else who's in that city will see their meetup feature that just detect where you are. And, the first time we did it, we had 11,000 people around the world all meet up so they can meet locals in their community who are interested in social media. And we're doing it again June 30th. It's just incredibly powerful because, not only does it take that online network and put it offline, but those connections are lasting. So people will meet people in their own cities that are interested in the same things and they didn't know. And it's a lasting connection. They keep having meetups throughout the year, keep building on that relationship. So we find that really powerful. And there's multiple tools, but we've used Meetup everywhere and it's been incredibly successful.
Fantastic. I mentioned earlier that I have a little grassroots nonprofit called Plant a Fish, and the frustrations that we have in the field are that a lot of these communities are very poor, as you were mentioning with the favelas. They're people, they're intelligent, they want to do something good, they feel pigeonholed into their lives. And I see the advent of technology and of access to communications being the solution to be able to get them not only out of the situation, but being able to get out there and do something. In many cases, we get a chance to get them to physically go and start doing restoration projects. And the key there is that they're able to share that story of success, that story of hope. How can we propagate this to those roots that I was mentioning earlier of the tree, so that we're able to nurture a positive momentum? Because it seems that sometimes when we look up at the canopy, our governing bodies, we don't get the fruits that we're expecting. Well,
I think Ericsson's a great example of that. We don't need to wait for government to do it. That there are companies that are doing it. And you know what? This is a great opportunity as well. It's a great opportunity for the companies. It's a win-win essentially.
No, I definitely believe that. I said it in my previous panel. What we are doing, if we are, as we did in Amazonas, enabling that rural village together with the operator here in Brazil to get connectivity, that's good for our technology, it's good for our customers, it's good for our employees, it's good for our shareholders. So it's a win-win. I think that's the best way to do anything, is actually a benefit for everyone. And I think, that is happening with the technology we are rolling out around the world. That has a glue wherever you are. And that comes back to your question as well. I think that we're going to see more and more of social behavior where you find what you are interested in and what you want to advocate for. You're going to get more and more people hooked up to that, cross the borders and do things, because we're going to have so many more people having access to the internet, and that's going to happen the next 5 years. So the speed of change will just increase, and the good idea, the good sort of solution will be replicated very, very much faster than in history.
And I think connectivity is key. It's really incredibly transformative, and I think it's going to accelerate progress dramatically. When I started Mashable, I was a sick kid. I missed a lot of school. I had, probably less than 50% attendance. It was terrible. I was never there. But, I was at home a lot. We got an internet connection. I started just learning at home and following what passions I was into, and obviously got into technology and started writing about it. And, what else would a sick kid do at home without an internet? You can actually, you can really progress if you have a connection. And we're talking about people in much more challenging situations can compete on almost an even playing field. That's what's so great about the internet. It's really a democratic force, a real equalizer. So I think it's key.
I sometimes get frustrated with the likes and the friend requests and all these sorts of things, because and some of the tweets that are out there, simply because I feel like if you have a tool that has so much capability, you need to make sure you use the tool in the right way so that it has the maximum impact. How can you make sure that that tool is honed and used in the proper ways?
Do you mean people are tweeting about what they have for breakfast? Is this what you're saying?
For example.
I actually think that's cool. I actually don't. What I think is great about social media is it has such a low bar. And I don't think people should overthink it. Because when you're tweeting what you have for breakfast, there is some statistician out there logging what everyone in every country has for breakfast and coming up with some really interesting data about breakfast habits and how we can make people's diets better. Everything you put out there, you would not believe it, but it's actually contributing value.
And you're not afraid that may drown out some of the other messages?
I think the future, and we were just talking about this earlier, there's a lot of volume of information, and this is the next great challenge. Once everyone's connected, we haven't solved everything because suddenly we have a volume of information that is so high. And it's not just people these days. I mean, we have people in our office who are wearing these wristbands that log like all your activity, the Nike Plus ones, the Fitbits, and then you can go share that and you can compare it to your friends. There's all these devices that are now talking to the internet. You can get something called Twine, which you put onto things and it'll start tweeting. I mean, if everything's tweeting and Facebooking, then you're going to have a lot of data to sort through. And it's kind of part of our role at Mashable as well, is to say, well, there's so much stuff out there. What's important to my community? What do they need to know? And that's the next great challenge. But I don't think people should create less media because they're scared that they're going to drown things out. I think it's really up to the technologists to figure out, well, how do we filter this stuff?
I'm not checking that Twitter about breakfast is all around the world, but it's sure somebody's interesting. But what I would like to say is also that the barrier come down for making solution because of the mobility, the broadband, and the cloud. The cloud for me is an application on the internet or something, because the barrier of cost, as Pete is saying, is going down so dramatically. So when we talk about, for example, Connect to Learn, bringing technology education out to rural villages, you do that with a PC in the cloud. You have only a screen, a dumb screen, and a keyboard. And everything else is up in internet. And you only need one internet link into the whole village, and suddenly they can be part of anything. So we have brought down the barriers. And I think that's one. The other thing that I also, which Pete mentioned, is that we have a forecast for 2020. It's going to be 50 billion connected devices in the world. Wow. And of course, many of them will bring efficiency. I see in front of me that cars will be connected. So traffic management in a city like Rio will be much more efficient. Don't go now, wait. It's a traffic jam here. They're going to steer it. You're going to reduce the CO2 emission. We just did in San Francisco, we're doing another experiment called social commuting. So it's a social network using the smartphone, actually using the smartphone, knowing where they are when they're commuting, to see that there are as full cars as possible going in and out of the city. And you use the social network, the mobility, and the broadband. Those type of ideas we would never come up with. But when you have all of you being part of it, then those ideas comes.
I kind of have a question for Hans. I'm gonna steal your job.
I can't wait to hear this one.
Because this is something that's come up on our side a few times, and it's this. And at what point does connectivity go from being a like to have to being a need? I mean, where on the hierarchy of needs is it? Because I think most of us still think, well, it's a nice to have. But shouldn't we be solving other problems first?
I think that we probably have passed that as consumers. That is not nice to have. I mean, we have seen that in the economic crisis that has gone past the last 20 years. In the first economic crisis, you dropped your connectivity. I cannot afford it. In the last economic crisis, nobody is dropping their connectivity. They see that as one of the most important things. And I also can say that the tougher it is in the country, economic climate or something, the traffic and the internet and the mobility is going up. Because you need to talk to someone, you need to communicate. So I think that we have passed that, where connectivity is, I will not equalize it with anything, but I think that governments need to think about broadband infrastructure equally much as think about roads, airports, any other social good. If you have a good broadband, you actually create, for every 10% of broadband penetration, you create 1% sustainable GDP. But only if you have solutions on top of it. The broadband as such will not help you. You need to have these things that we are talking about.
Well, out of respect to the social media clock, we have about 50 seconds, and I'm going to give the last word to Pete. Do you have any last thoughts before we leave the stage?
It better be a good word then.
Absolutely.
I think it really comes down to, connectivity is incredibly valuable. It's transformative. The more connected the world is, the better it will be, and the more opportunity we have to solve some of these problems that we're facing. They're huge global challenges. Nobody can solve them alone, but if we can get the communities that are actually living these problems to become part of the solution, if we can all unite, and that's really what this conference is about, right? It's about how do we bring social, how do we open up the conversation, and how do we solve these problems together.
Well, Pete, Hans, thank you so very much for forging ahead and leading us to a better world, and hopefully some really amazing solutions so that we can start living with this planet rather than living on the planet.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.